A bit over a month ago now, we saw the release of Minecraft 26.1, otherwise known as the Tiny Takeover, and it was the worst update ever made. Okay, that's maybe a bit exaggeratory, but in my opinion, it was definitely the weakest game drop we've gotten so far. That got me thinking about how I would possibly try and fix the content to at least be a little more worthwhile. As it is now, I hardly see this update changing how I play the game besides maybe getting a singular puppy. But as I was thinking about this drop, I was also reflecting on the other game drops we've gotten so far as well. As of writing this, there have technically been 8 total game drops, and I think each of them have at least a little room for improvement. So today, I thought it'd be fun to look back on each of the 8 drops so far and talk about how I would have improved them to either make their content more worthwhile or better tie them into the game's pre-existing mechanics. A large criticism for the drop system I've seen online is the fact that the additions feel quite random and disconnected from the rest of the game. We'll be going through each of the drops in chronological order, explaining what I think each of their core goals and issues are, and how I would change the drop to better reach those goals. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, as I may consider doing this again with drops in the future if this video does well. But with that said, let's jump right into our first drop. So first up, we've got to take a look at the Armored Paws drop. Technically, this came out before drops fully replaced updates, but I figured I might as well include it here. The main issue that I have with this drop is the fact that
it should have been me, not him!
I am still incredibly disappointed with every single person that voted the armadillo over the crab. Be honest, how much has wolf armor actually changed how you play? Most people I see still just have their wolves sitting at home, but now with an ugly set of armor on.
Whoa!
On the other hand, if the crab won, we would be playing a very different game since Extended Reach would be an insanely helpful ability for building, mining, combat, etc. Like, I genuinely don't think the armadillo had any real reason to win. It's not even good for being a soccer ball now. But okay, I'm not gonna say my fix is to just replace the armadillo with the crab. Let's look at this drop's content as a whole and see if we can actually make the armadillo stuff more interesting. I personally think there are 2 main issues with this drop, not including the crab. The first is just that the wolf armor looks kinda ugly. If wolves are gonna be stuck sitting down for their entire lives, I'd at least hope they'd look cute while doing it. Most of the time, I don't like to give my wolves armor since it hinders how cute they look, but I think the wolf armor could get improved visuals. Primarily, I think the armor should be fully dyeable. You can dye the armor as it is, but it only takes up small patches of the armor for some reason. It should really be more like a leather chest plate that has the whole thing become the color of your choice. But the other issue I feel is a bit more important as it actually has to do with gameplay. Wolves were obviously the central focus of this drop as they got a ton of new variants and are the ones that get to wear the new wolf armor. I imagine wolf armor was added to encourage players to actually travel with their wolves more often since now they wouldn't die to basically anything. I mean, come on, just walk it off. But it seems to me that most people still keep their wolves at home, so I think to truly improve this drop, they would need to add a better reason to have your dog travel with you. There are many ways they could do this, but a simple one that I came up with was maybe allowing the wolves to dig up items similar to a sniffer, but like actually good. Maybe after traveling a certain number of blocks with a player, they'd be able to use their nose to dig up some sort of item. This could be anything from new pottery sherds, armor trims, or maybe a new type of treasure map that leads to a different buried treasure chest than the ones in a shipwreck. They could even just dig up non-exclusive items as well, so long as they're valuable enough in some way to collect. In my mind, this would sort of be like the dog moons in Super Mario Odyssey, where wolves would run around following the player for a bit until they catch the scent of something and go to dig it up. That way, players will actually be incentivized to go explore with their wolves in order to find new loot. Maybe upon world generation, certain blocks would be set as wolf digging spots, so the player would have to wander until their wolf stumbles upon one. I think this has the potential to be a really fun mechanic and would give people a legitimate reason to both explore with their wolves and give them armor so that they don't die. Of course, what items the wolves give I haven't fully come up with yet, but I think this would be a good jumping off point to make wolves a bit more worth taking on expeditions. The next drop was the bundles of Bravery, which, I mean, there's not a ton to comment on here. Literally, this drop added one new set of items, being the bundles. No one cares about you. For the most part, I think bundles were very well implemented. They're very helpful items to help declutter the inventory, especially in some of the new structures like the trial chambers. I know some people wish they could hold more items, but I think as an early game tool, the way they work makes sense. If you want to use bigger containers, that's what the shulker boxes are for later in the game. However, there is a minor issue that I do have with the bundles that I would love to see changed. For some reason, the UI only lets the player scroll through 12 items at once. The bundle can hold hold up to 64 different items. That means if you want to get out an item you put in first, you may have to take out almost every other item in the bundle to reach it. I think this is extremely tedious, so my only real improvement for this drop would be to fix this system. Showing all items at once would probably work just fine, but if they feel like that would fill up too much screen space, then I think letting you scroll onto a sort of next page would help make the bundle feel far less clunky. I don't think the way it works now is a huge problem, so the drop overall was successful in what it set out to do, but I think the bundle could still be made a little bit better. Alright, but when people think about the start of the drop system, the Garden Awakens is really the first one to come to mind. It was the first big drop, as the other two were clearly much smaller in terms of the amount of content. The Garden Awakens introduced the brand new Pale Garden biome, and it's still the only drop to have a new biome introduced. At least until the sulfur one. It's supposed to be a lot spookier than the other overworld biomes. You never know when something might pop up. That was the scariest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. I do think overall they did quite well capturing this biome's vibe. There's a lot of unique elements like the gray plants and skies that help sell the atmosphere. However, I do think they could have gone a lot further with it. When this drop initially released, this biome was extremely disappointing, as most of the time it would be absurdly tiny. Luckily, Mojang did go back and tweak this biome a bit to make it much bigger on average, though I do think they could still go further with it. I think part of what makes a forest like this scary is getting lost in a seemingly endless mass of foggy trees. Sort of like the Lost Woods in several Zelda games, I think the player should really feel engulfed in this biome. If they can super easily see the edge of it, then the eeriness is kinda lost. The size issue is especially annoying, since even after they updated the size, I can still stumble upon pale oak biomes without a single creaking heart. That takes away the main spooky highlight of the biome, and if a player needed resin for their horrific light orange house, it'd be very frustrating to be forced to find another pale oak forest. So I think, at the very least, the size should be expanded so that there's always a minimum of one creaking heart per biome. On top of that, I think the player also needs more of a reason to explore this place. This is one of the most unique directions an overworld biome has gone in since the Mushroom Island, and yet it doesn't really feel like there's any reason to go into it. Sure, there's the pale oak and moss, but you can literally just grab that at the edge of the biome and be done with it. The creaking heart does encourage a little more exploration, but once you have one, you never have to go back to a pale garden again. So I think two things could be done here to help encourage players to continue exploring this biome. First is to just add more unique blocks. I have been begging for a white pumpkin from Minecraft Story Mode since this biome was revealed, and I would still really like to see it. The cowards are afraid of making Captain Sparkle's canon. The second and main thing I think they should add to the biome though is some sort of structure. The only one that could spawn here is the Woodland Mansion, which is just a holdover from the roof forest and isn't particularly scary. Also, this one generated on top of a lava pool.
That's what the kids call epic fail.
I think they should add something small but eerie here that has some sort of loot worth exploring for. I think it'd be cool if the structure was shorter than the trees as well, so you'd actually have to go into the forest in order to find it. This could be something like a bit of rubble, some sort of grave site, or really just anything that would match the vibe. That would at least make me much more excited to find this biome and continue finding this biome outside of just getting the really nice looking wood type. Following the Garden Awakens was the first drop of 2025, being the Spring to Life drop. I'll be honest, I had no idea what to say for this one. This is easily the least focused of the drops, as it just kinda added a few new random plant types and animal skins. I want my changes in this video to be tied to the theme of the update itself, but I don't really have a theme to go off of here. At best, I could just talk about improving some of the specific additions, but really the only issue I have is that leaf litter generates way too frequently. The floors and forests now look really ugly because there's just too much brown mixed in here. If they cut it down by like 75%, I think they would look much better. Besides that though, I think the other additions were fine. Clearly this was more of a filler drop, so there's really no more reason to focus on it. Funnily enough, our next drop probably added less content, but since it was actually focused on something, we have a topic to talk about. Chase the Skies was the drop all about the Happy Ghast, which I would probably say ended up being more useful than I was initially expecting. Obviously we already have a flight tool in the game with the Elytra, but the Happy Ghast fulfills a totally different purpose. If you've ever tried building with the Elytra, the Happy Ghast, on the other hand, is much easier to work with as you move a lot slower, are able to stop in place, and can even walk on top of it. So if you have a tall tower build, which a lot of players, including myself, like to do, the Happy Ghast is a perfect tool for the job. Building wise, the Happy Ghast is great, but there are a few minor issues that I've run into quite a bit. Sticking with the building theme, while the Happy Ghast is great for working on towers, it's not as good for working on flying structures. Towers are generally connected to the ground, so it makes sense to start from there and work your way up by flying with the Ghast. fast. However, if you want to make something that's flying in the sky, you sadly can't do that without building up from the ground first with temporary blocks and destroying them after. I think the Happy Ghast could have been the perfect solution for this issue. Since we can already stand on the Happy Ghast as a platform, what if we could place blocks on it as well? This would completely eliminate the need to construct time-consuming pillars and would make sense with the Happy Ghast building focus. This doesn't even have to be about making a high up build either. Maybe someone wants to build something in the end's void, but doesn't want to bridge out over 500 blocks just to get the base started. Of my two Happy Ghast problems, this is the one I want to see addressed the most, since I do like to build flying bases or objects quite often.
What?
If you really want to build off in the void without bridging, there is still a way. First, get a copper golem that is about to become a statue and wax him. Then tie both it and a Happy Ghast to another Happy Ghast. From there, fly off to the spot you want to build at. Once you get there, jump between the Happy Ghasts and unwax the copper golem. This will cause the copper golem to freeze, and you can now freely build off of him. The other main issue with the Happy Ghast is just its speed. While it obviously makes sense for it to be slower than the Elytra since that's meant for transport, the Happy Ghast being slower than the player walking speed is still absurd. Now I believe this was done to make placing blocks in a big row much easier, but I don't think it needed to be like this. It makes transporting the Ghast from build to build really obnoxious, and since part of the mob's fun is traveling with friends, I don't think this should be painful. The easiest thing they could do was to just give the Happy Ghast a sprint function like many of the other mounts. That way it can keep the slower speed for building while having a faster speed for transportation. They could also give it the ability to work with speed potions, which would be a bit more annoying to work with, but it'd at least be something. I also think it could be fun if the Happy Ghast was affected by beacons, or at least as long as the player was riding on it. That's obviously not been done before with any other mob, but I think it would be a fun addition to the beacon since nothing about it has changed for several years. Best case scenario though, they just add a sprint button that significantly boosts the movement. Next up, we have easily my favorite game drop with the Copper Age. In my opinion, it's got by far the best content. The Copper Golem is a fantastic item sorting tool along with being just a really cute guy. Shelves are one of the best sets of building blocks in the entire game. Genuinely, almost any build could benefit from them in some way. So as a whole, I don't really have a ton to criticize this update on. Everything that was added here I'd say met or even exceeded my expectations. The only real exception would be copper armor and tools, since I think it would be cool if they became greener as they lost durability. That's just a visual thing though, it literally wouldn't change gameplay at all. Plus, if you really want green armor, you can always just make emerald armor anyway. What do you mean Lego Minecraft Steve lied? So beside that, the only real way to criticize this update is to just ask for more copper stuff. Obviously the goal of this update was to make copper more useful, which I would say it absolutely did. This could always be pushed further though, so here are a few extra copper ideas. I mentioned this back in my nitpicks video, but being able to have green fire and campfires to go with the copper torches would be amazing. Fire in different colors always looks really cool to me, so having more options would always be a plus in my book. Another common copper suggestion would be copper rails. Minecarts are a form of travel that many people think need to be made better in order to compete with other options like the Elytra. While I would still argue they have their uses, a speed boost would certainly be appreciated. Luckily, Mojang seems to already be planning this thanks to the minecart experimental features. However, I do think this would cause a lot of issues in the redstone community if the changes were added as is. Minecarts on powered rails go at the perfect speed for contraptions like super smelters to perfectly divide all the items. So instead, I think adding copper rails with the new speed boost while letting powered rails keep the old speed would be best. But with all that said, the Copper Age was a very solid drop that doesn't really have any issues that need to be fixed. Pretty similar story for the following drop, Mounts of Mayhem. Several mounts were added or updated here, so I would say they did a pretty good job with a theme. I don't really have a ton of issues with what was implemented. In fact, both the spears and Nautilus have become more useful than I initially believed through later discoveries. Spears can be used in mob killing chambers, which lets the player get more loot since they can be enchanted with looting. As for the Nautilus, what if the Nautilus was locked in a chair for millennia and betrayed? This is genuinely one of my favorite discoveries people have made in recent years, as using the Nautilus and shelves, you can basically make a perfect chair furniture piece that you can actually sit in. Using different Nautilus armor, you can even give the cushion a different color, opening this to a ton of customization. This shot up the Nautilus on my mob tier list significantly, and I already liked them a decent amount. I know that I'm going to be building a ton of these in my world from now on.
What?
The reason I went on that side tangent is because all of my improvements for this drop have to do with making these chairs a bit easier to obtain, since I honestly think that's the main way I'm going to be using these features. The main issue is that the only way to get Nautilus armor is through underwater structure chests. They're also fairly rare. Copper only has a 10.8% chance, iron has 5.4, gold has 2.7, and diamond has 1.1%. If you want to make multiple chairs, or heck even just a sofa with multiple seats, it's going to be a nightmare to collect all of the equipment you would need. I'm absolutely not against exploring, but I think adding a crafting recipe for these would also be nice. It would be fair if it was expensive, like requiring a Nautilus shell for example, but having some way to guarantee the type you need rather than relying on a ton of luck would be nice. Especially on multiplayer servers where people may have looted all nearby water chests to make their own chairs. I highly doubt Mojang would do this, especially since stuff like horse armor doesn't have a crafting recipe, but I can dream. Vanilla tweaks, save me. Vanilla tweaks, save me, vanilla tweaks. The other change that I would love to see is... Yeah, I need some way to shut them up. Yes, I can always turn my volume down, but I don't want to force my friends on multiplayer servers to do that every single time they visit me. Vanilla Tweaks has an amazing solution that I always implement on my servers that lets you silence mobs by naming them Silence Me with a name tag. I think that'd be a great feature for the purely vanilla game without needing to add on data packs. Again, both of these improvements are really just to make the chairs better rather than the drop itself, but I think the drop itself already works quite well for what it was trying to do. And finally, we've made it to the bad one, the Tiny Takeover. Unfortunately, the issue for me really comes down to the core concept. I just simply don't care about an update all about changing the texture of babies. I could say they should improve the textures, a lot of them certainly need it, but I don't think that's very interesting. Instead, I think the main area that can be improved is the golden dandelion. I do like the idea behind this item, as you can feed it to a mob and it'll keep them as a baby forever. At the moment, the way you obtain this is by crafting a dandelion with 8 golden nuggets. Personally, I think this is really boring. Dandelions are extremely common, and gold is also fairly easy to get. This doesn't really open up the game for any new gameplay. Instead, you just sort of go through your chests and get the items you already had. Optimally, I think the golden dandelion should open up for something new to do or expand on a feature that was underdeveloped. Dandelions in gold are perfectly fine as they are, but you know who isn't?
My mom!
The sniffer. Remember when I brought them up back in the wolf segment? That's what we call subtle foreshadowing.
You know.
The whole idea behind this mob is that it can dig up ancient flowers, but right now, it can only get 2 of them. That by itself is pretty pathetic, especially for a mob vote winner, but it gets even worse when you discover that these flowers are practically useless. They can work in very niche builds, but besides that, they don't really have any function besides making dyes. That has led to a lot of players not even bothering with the sniffer period, but if they had an actual useful item to dig up like the golden dandelion, that would be so much better. It would already fit with the mob being flower based, and since the sniffer is supposed to be some sort of preserved ancient egg, having it find the flower that preserves a mob's youth also kinda fits. Really, I'm just begging for any reason to not call the sniffer totally pointless. But if Mojang is dead set on keeping the sniffer in F tier, then I think there is another way they could have implemented the golden dandelion. Funnily enough, it's actually through another mob vote mob, this time being one of the losers. The Moo Bloom has been very popular ever since its reveal, despite Mojang not really saying how it would be useful at all. So I think the golden dandelion could have finally been its shot to join the game and have a decent use. The Tiny Takeover was meant to be a cute slop update, and the Moo Bloom would fit right in as that's basically all it had going for it in the mob vote. The Copper Golem also showed us that Mojang is both willing to add back losers and willing to change their use, so the Moo Bloom having the ability to give the player the golden dandelion or something similar seems plausible. But the question is, where would the Moo Bloom spawn? Well, remember when I mentioned the Mushroom Island back in the Garden Awakens section?
Oh, not again!
I think they could add another biome similar to the Mushroom Island, but instead based around flowers. This wouldn't even have to be a complex biome, just make it another rare island in the ocean where only Moo Blooms can spawn. That would actually introduce some new gameplay to this drop, as it would require the player to explore and find the new location. I imagine this biome would also be filled with most of the game's flower types, so it could be a very cutesy place to build a base, which again fits perfectly in the theme of the update. Maybe it's a bit much to ask for an entirely new biome, but if its only new feature would have been a recolored cow, then I think they could have done it. Unfortunately, at this point, it seems pretty unlikely that they're going to change the golden dandelion, but I think it was still interesting to give ideas on how it could have been more engaging. As it is now though, the Tiny Takeover basically changes nothing about how I play the game, and I'm just going to have to live with that. But anyways, that's it for this video. Are you mad it didn't improve the groundbreaking fan favorite Bats and Pots drop? Let me know in the comments. I had a lot of fun coming up with these ideas, and I'm curious to hear what you all thought of them as well. Also, from the looks of things, the new sulfur drop already seems like one of the more interesting drops for me, so definitely looking forward to playing that here soon. But before I go, I've got to thank my members, being Windows Vista's fan-made content, newly rated Geometry Dash levels, Genie VV Yoso, Wyatt Derpy, Danny Gaming Central, Leonard Von Hevering, Made ZO2, Starfly, Disco Fama, Cassie Channel, Drop D Mike 75, Virtual Tomato, Extreme 5026, Daniel Castillo 1262, Aaron 0729, Anton 3669, Smuggy, Guy 112, Young Smoky VP7, Zach Pro, Flame 765, Peanut Brown of Gallery, Gorposaurus, BFDI Macaron, Stephen Hafner, Night Vision 101, PDX, Wilbur, Mogo Boat, Stuffy Ant, Rich229, Jehojim, Magnuson Larslot, Trifector, Tibby, Hippopotamus, Levi Strux, Nuclear, Blessed Tiger, Yanni the Duck, Trader Mo, Mevins 2001, Display Changer, B Major 2003, Sir Musty, Belandor, Cinder CC, Jade Avery, Thicky Reiki, Ungenio TM, Tesseract, JubeTube, Jameson Pageson, Zfrost Keep, and Christian Flattery Sequel Edition. But anyways, dry bones for Smash, and I'll see you guys next time.